Elijah Nash did not need permission to recognize a dying engine. One hand on the hood and 30 seconds of silence. That was all it ever took. He had done it for 15 years with machines worth more than most people would earn in a lifetime, and they had never once lied to him. But Charlotte Reed did not know that. She saw only a mechanic in a stained work uniform pressing his hands against the most valuable asset on her floor, right in front of her most important client of the year, in full view of every camera in the building, so she fired him immediately. That was the most expensive mistake Charlotte Reed would ever make. What happened in the 5 minutes following that single decision is something no one in that building would ever forget. Elijah arrived at Apex Motoring at 6:45 every morning, not because his shift started then. It started at 7, but because the garage was quieter before the rest of the staff arrived, and quiet was when machines told the truth. He drove a 2011 pickup truck with 160,000 miles on the engine, parked it in the far corner of the employee lot where no one would bother it, and walked through the side entrance with the steadiness that comes not from arrogance, but from a man who has long since decided who he is. Apex Motoring occupied the most expensive block of commercial real estate in the Brentwood district of Los Angeles, a 3-story building of floor-to-ceiling glass, polished concrete, and cold-engineered light, the kind of place where even the air carried intention. Its showroom floor held machines that most people would never touch in their lifetimes. A Pagani Huayra in pearl silver, a Ferrari SF90 in matte midnight, a Koenigsegg Regera positioned beneath a custom overhead rig as though it were a crown jewel waiting to be appraised. Elijah walked past all of it every morning without slowing down. He had seen better. His position in the company directory read Level 2 Technical Specialist, a polite classification for the 4th rung from the bottom of a department that Adrian Cole ran with the enthusiasm of a man who believed rank and ability were the same thing. Adrian had held the title of Head of Technical Operations for 3 years, and in those years he had assembled his team the way insecure men always assemble teams, keeping capable people beneath him, elevating those who made him look good in meetings, and treating expertise as a resource to be managed rather than a fact to be respected. Elijah had never attempted to look good in a meeting. He showed up, he worked, and when something was wrong with a car, he said so. For 14 months that arrangement had held. A junior technician named Jason, 24, 2 years out of vocational school, still in possession of the honesty that experience had not yet taught him to calibrate, had started following Elijah around the workshop the way an apprentice follows a craftsman. Not because Elijah had invited it, but because Jason had noticed that cars Elijah touched ran differently afterward, and that no one in the department could explain why. One morning, while Elijah was running a pre-inspection on a McLaren 720s, Jason leaned against the neighboring bay and asked directly, "You know way more than any of these guys. Why are you doing this job?" Elijah did not look up. He had his right hand resting on the coolant reservoir housing, fingers slightly spread, reading the temperature distribution across the surface the way a doctor reads a pulse in the dark. "Cars are the same wherever you go," he said after a moment. "You just have to know how to listen." Jason accepted this without understanding it, which was the usual outcome of conversations with Elijah. There was almost nothing in the public record to explain how a man of his evident knowledge had landed in a Level 2 role at a showroom in Los Angeles. What existed was 14 months of spotless performance, a carefully unremarkable employment history, and a life lived at a deliberate distance from questions. The name on his badge read Elijah Nash, straightforward, exactly as he had intended. When the building's internal phone system buzzed at 7:59 and the receptionist's voice came through shaking, "All technical staff to the main briefing room. Ms. Reed is requesting everyone right now." Elijah set down his torque wrench, wiped his hands, and walked toward whatever the day had become. Charlotte Reed stood at the front of the briefing room in a white blazer that had probably cost more than Elijah's truck, holding a tablet with both hands and looking at the assembled technical staff with the specific focus of a person who is accustomed to being the most prepared individual in any room. She was 31 years old and had been running Apex Motoring since 27. When her father retired following a cardiac event and left the company to her in the middle of a fiscal year that was already underperforming. Within 18 months, she had restructured the service contracts, rebuilt the marketing operation from the ground up, and tripled annual revenue. People who had doubted her had stopped doing so publicly, though, a few, Adrian Cole among them, had simply learned to perform respect while quietly resenting what it cost them. Charlotte knew who they were and kept them where she could see them. "I'll be brief," she said. At 10 o'clock this morning, Xavier Holt is bringing his vehicle to this facility for pre-auction service. Most of you know that name. For those who don't, Xavier Holt is one of the 12 wealthiest private automotive collectors in the world. The vehicle is the Voss Phantom Zero, a first-generation prototype. There is one in existence. Its current valuation is $200 million. She paused for exactly the right number of seconds, long enough for the number to land, short enough to keep authority. The car is scheduled for auction next Thursday. If this service goes well, we are positioned to sign a $40 million per year exclusive service contract covering Mr. Holt's entire collection. If it does not go well, that outcome is not one I intend to allow. Adrian was already nodding with the elaborate confidence of a man previewing his own performance. Charlotte did not look at him. No one approaches that vehicle without my direct authorization or Adrian's. No photographs, no contact, no exceptions. The designated service team is Adrian and the 2 senior technicians he has pre-selected. Everyone else maintains regular assignments and stays clear of the vehicle bay. The room was quiet, with the specific quiet of people taking instructions they intend to remember. Elijah sat in the second-to-last row with his arms loosely crossed and listened. When Charlotte said the name of the car, Voss Phantom Zero, his hands went completely still. Not a flinch, not a reaction anyone would catalog or remember later. Just stillness. The kind that lives in the body rather than the face, that belongs to a man hearing a name from a previous life spoken out loud in a room that has no idea what it is holding. Jason, who had developed the habit of watching Elijah the way a sailor watches the horizon, saw it and filed it away without knowing what to do with it. Charlotte finished the briefing in 4 more sentences. Adrian stood up afterward and elaborated for 90 seconds about a 47-point inspection protocol he had personally designed, using language that sounded thorough until you noticed it contained nothing specific. Charlotte let him speak, then ended it with a look. The room cleared. As Elijah rose, he looked toward the bay entrance, toward the space where the car would arrive in less than 2 hours, and said the name once, quietly, to himself. Voss Phantom Zero. The way a man says the name of something he has spent years not naming. The vehicle transport arrived at 10 minutes past 10. It came in 3 parts, 2 matte black SUVs that positioned themselves at either side of the bay entrance, and a flatbed hauler finished in charcoal, unmarked, the kind of transport reserved for cargo that does not want to be seen until the moment is right. The hauler's rear opened hydraulically and lowered a precision ramp, and the Voss Phantom Zero rolled forward into the California morning light, as though it were not a machine at all, but something that had been deliberately withheld until now. Every person standing in or near that garage either stopped speaking or stopped moving, sometimes both. The car was not beautiful in the way purpose-built supercars are usually beautiful. It did not perform beauty for the room. It simply existed in 3 dimensions more convincingly than anything else present, its titanium satin body panels catching light without chasing it, its profile so low and wide it seemed to compress the perspective of the concrete floor around it. Xavier Holt stepped out of the lead SUV. Around 50, lean, with the economy of movement that belongs to men who make high-value decisions faster than others can form the relevant questions. No watch, no tie, no jewelry. His independent automotive engineer, a woman named Grace Lawson, walked 2 steps behind him and slightly to the right, carrying a slim mat case and the particular air of someone who is present not to be seen but to know things that need knowing. Charlotte met them at the entrance with a handshake and a smile calibrated precisely for this occasion, and they exchanged the brief professional courtesies of people who both understand what is at stake and have agreed not to say it out loud. Elijah stood at the edge of the assembled staff with his arms loosely crossed, watching the car. Not the way the room was watching it, not the way you watch a painting, taking in surface and effect, but the way a surgeon watches a patient when no one else in the room yet understands there is something wrong. What he saw in the first 40 seconds after the Phantom Zero entered the building was a list that assembled itself in his mind with the mechanical certainty of a diagnostic readout. The ride height was off, not dramatically, not in any way visible to someone without precise knowledge of what this specific prototype's ground clearance was supposed to be at rest. The rear diffuser sat approximately 4 millimeters lower than specification. The wing angle was not centered. These were small things, perhaps cosmetic to someone operating from a general knowledge of high-performance vehicles. But then there was the smell. Faint, carried on the draft through the open bay door, mixing with concrete and machine oil, the specific chemical signature of a high-pressure sealing compound in the early stages of thermal decomposition. He knew it with the specificity of someone who had spent months with this exact compound in an earlier chapter of his life, and the knowledge arrived not as memory but as recognition. The way you recognize a sound that once meant danger before your brain has time to form words around it. He understood what was wrong with the car within 40 seconds of it entering the building. The dual-pressure fuel system, a design his father had engineered, and that he himself had spent over a year refining, contained a structural vulnerability in the earliest prototypes that had never been publicly disclosed, because Heinrich Voss had never publicly disclosed failures of any kind. The sealing compound between the combustion chamber partition and the secondary pressure manifold carried a known thermal sensitivity at sustained ambient temperatures above 72 degrees. A long transport run on a warm California morning. The car had been sitting in the hauler. The compound was breaking down. If someone started this vehicle at full performance load without addressing it first, the risk was not theoretical. Jason touched his elbow. A warning, soft and urgent. Elijah reached up and removed Jason's hand from his arm gently but without discussion. Then he walked toward the car. He did not rush. He walked at the same deliberate pace he moved through everything, and the small ripple of awareness that spread through the gathered staff as he broke from the group was almost visible, like a change in air pressure before weather. By the time he reached the car, he was close enough to lay his right hand flat against the hood at the forward edge of the driver's side. And the surface was warm in a specific targeted way that had nothing to do with sunlight or ambient temperature. His fingers spread slightly, reading the gradient. His left hand came down, and he crouched to look under the front splitter, and what he found there confirmed what he had already smelled. He pressed 2 fingers to the inner edge of the composite panel and brought them to his nose, and he stayed in that position for perhaps 8 seconds. Then he stood. "Who authorized you to touch that vehicle?" The voice came from behind him with the flat precision of someone who had trained their voice to function as an instrument of control. Charlotte Reed was crossing the bay floor toward him, tablet at her side, every person in the building watching. She was not raising her voice. She did not need to. Elijah turned to face her without moving away from the car. "There's a fault in the fuel pressure sealing system," he said, keeping his voice level and without theater. "The sealing compound in the dual-pressure manifold partition is showing thermal degradation. The car was transported in warm conditions. If it started in full load mode, you were explicitly told this morning that no unauthorized personnel would approach this vehicle," Charlotte said. She stopped 4 feet from him. "I heard you, Ms. Reed," Elijah said. "This takes precedence." Adrian Cole materialized from the left side of the gathering with the instinct of a man who recognizes an opportunity to confirm his own relevance. "Elijah." His voice was almost gentle, which was worse than contempt. "You're not assigned to this car. You don't have the clearance for this bay. Step back." Elijah looked at Adrian for 1 second, the kind of look that contains a complete and accurate assessment, and then looked back at Charlotte. "The standard OBD system will not detect the fault," he said. "You need to access the secondary diagnostic port. If this car is run in track mode before someone addresses the manifold sealing, that is enough." Charlotte's voice had not risen. If anything, it had gotten quieter, which was always more effective. "Mr. Nash, you have accessed a $200 million asset without authorization, in direct violation of a directive issued this morning in front of our client." The pause was precise and intentional. Xavier Holt and Grace Lawson were standing 20 feet away, and neither of them said a word. "Your employment with Apex Motoring is terminated, effective immediately. Please surrender your access badge at the front desk and collect your personal belongings." 25 people stood in that garage, and not one of them made a sound. Jason was looking at the floor. Elijah held Charlotte's gaze without flinching, and what she saw in his eyes was not anger and not humiliation. It was something quieter than either, the look of a man who has been misread before and knows exactly what it costs and has decided not to spend energy disputing it in the wrong room at the wrong time. "All right," he said. His voice was entirely steady. He looked at the car once more, a brief, direct look, the way you look at something you are leaving in uncertain hands when you have done everything in your power to prevent the outcome you can see coming. "Don't start the car," he said, "especially not track mode." Then he turned and walked toward the side exit, and the only sound in the building was the clean rhythm of his footsteps. The bay resumed its choreography. Adrian directed the 2 designated technicians to bring the primary diagnostic console to the vehicle's left flank, and they moved with the slightly theatrical efficiency of people performing competence rather than practicing it. Charlotte stood beside Xavier and Grace at a measured distance, narrating the inspection process in the composed, calibrated tone she used for clients of this tier, a tone that communicated both confidence and deference in a proportion she had spent years refining. The diagnostic console connected to the Phantom Zero's accessible port and ran its initialization sequence. The screen populated, green indicators across every primary system. Adrian looked at the readout, then at Charlotte, and gave a small, satisfied nod that was already halfway toward being self-congratulatory. Grace Lawson was watching him do this from 6 feet away. She unclipped the slim mat case from her shoulder, set it on the work trolley, and opened it to reveal a device with no commercial markings, 3 custom cable leads, and a display screen running modified firmware. Xavier glanced at it and said nothing. This was her process. He had engaged her specifically for her process. "May I?" she asked Adrian, gesturing toward the car. Adrian's expression passed through surprise, irritation, and performed graciousness in under a second before he spread his hand toward the vehicle with a magnanimous gesture that cost him nothing. Grace connected the first cable to the primary port. Then she reached along the left sill panel to a secondary access point, a port that Adrian had not known existed, that appeared on no commercially distributed documentation for this vehicle, and connected the second lead. The device ran its sequence for 45 seconds. Then it stopped. The screen showed 2 lines of text, and Grace read them, and her expression did not change, which was itself a form of answer. She turned to Charlotte. Her voice was even and unhurried. "The fuel pressure seal integrity is at 61%. Safe operational threshold is 85%. The combustion chamber wall temperature distribution confirms early-stage sealing compound failure. Starting this vehicle in standard mode carries elevated risk. In full performance mode, track mode as the manufacturer designated it, the risk classification is critical." The word critical landed in the bay the way a stone lands in water that has been very still. Adrian's hands increased their speed on the diagnostic keyboard, as though more input would produce a different set of facts. Charlotte's tablet had gone motionless in her hand. Xavier Holt stepped forward and looked at the screen, and then looked at Adrian, who was still typing, jaw set, the expression of a man drowning in a room with no water, and then looked at Charlotte with the expression of a man who has been in enough high-stakes rooms to recognize when the wrong person has been removed from one. "The man who approached the vehicle before your diagnostic team ran their equipment," Xavier said. His voice was low and carefully uninflected. "He knew this before any instrument confirmed it." Charlotte said nothing. Grace looked at Charlotte directly. "There is a man," she said, "who walked to this car before we connected a single cable. He identified the fault, named the system, and described the specific risk of full-load ignition. He told you this in clear language." She let a precise of time to pass. "You terminated his employment approximately 12 minutes ago." The bay was as quiet as it had been when Elijah walked out. Adrian attempted in that silence to offer reassurance. He turned from the console and told Charlotte the issue was likely manageable with materials already in inventory, that his team could address it, that this was within the scope of their standard protocols. Grace looked at him with an expression of perfect, unhostile patience. "The repair requires access to the secondary manifold through a non-standard cavity specific to first production run VOS prototypes," she said. "The sealing compound required is not commercially distributed. The repair procedure has never been publicly documented. There is no reasonable way for your team to carry this knowledge." She folded her hands in her lap. "There is, however, apparently one person in this building who does." Charlotte set her tablet on the trolley. She looked toward the side exit. "Jason," she said quietly. He was already looking at her. "Nash still in the parking lot?" The employee lot at the rear of the building was exposed to the full weight of the mid-morning California sun, and the asphalt was releasing heat in the slow, patient way that parking lots do in Los Angeles before noon. Elijah was standing beside his truck. He had not started it. He held his phone loosely in one hand and a cup of coffee, drawn from the staff room before the morning had overtaken everything, sat on the hood beside him. He was not looking at his phone. He was looking at the middle distance of the empty lot with the expression of a man who is not quite finished deciding something, who has not yet given himself permission to simply drive away. Charlotte came through the side door alone. No tablet, no assistant, no Adrian positioned 2 steps behind her as a buffer. Just her in the white blazer that now seemed faintly wrong for the heat of a parking lot at 10:30 in the morning, walking across warm asphalt at a pace that was slightly faster than her usual one and therefore slightly less controlled. She stopped about 8 feet from him. For a moment neither of them spoke. The sound of the street beyond the perimeter fence, the city, indifferent to all of it, moved through the space between them. "Mr. Nash," she said. Elijah looked up from the middle distance and held her gaze without expression and waited. "Grace Lawson confirmed what you described," Charlotte said. "The compound, the secondary port, all of it." Elijah nodded once, slowly. "I know. I need you to come back in and fix it." She did not add please, not yet, but the absence of her usual command register was its own form of the word. "You terminated my employment," Elijah said, "effective immediately." Those were the exact words. Charlotte did not look away. "I know what I said." "Then you know what I'm doing right now," Elijah said, which was standing beside his truck. "Going nowhere. Present, but not yet committed." Charlotte looked at him in the heat of the parking lot and did something that did not come naturally to her, which was to take the time to say something honest instead of something strategic. "I made a decision based on incomplete information," she said. "I saw a technician violate a clear directive in front of my client. I didn't know what you knew. I didn't know who you were. That was my failure." Elijah watched her give the answer. "You also didn't listen," he said. "I gave you the information. You had it in the room. You chose the hierarchy over what I was telling you." Charlotte did not deflect. "Yes," she said. "I did." A bird crossed the fence line somewhere above them. A delivery truck passed in the street. Elijah looked at his coffee cup, then back at Charlotte. "One condition," he said. "When I'm working on that car, no one interferes. Not Adrian, not anyone managing how this looks. You stand there and you let me work." Charlotte said, "Done." "And you watch," Elijah said. "Not to manage. To understand what you're looking at." She was quiet for a moment with something working behind her eyes that was close to the beginning of real respect. "All right," she said. Elijah left the coffee on the hood and walked with her back through the side door. When Elijah walked back into the bay, the room rearranged itself around him in the wordless way that spaces rearrange when the center of gravity shifts. Jason was the first person he saw, and Jason had a pair of work gloves held out at shoulder height, ready, without being asked and before there was any reasonable way to have known to ask. Elijah took them. Adrian was standing to the left of the Phantom Zero with his arms crossed in a posture engineered to project authority and that communicated, in the current circumstances, a man holding himself together through applied external pressure. Charlotte stood to the right against the wall as she had agreed. Grace Lawson was seated at the diagnostic cart, device still connected, display still live. Xavier Holt stood in the far corner with his hands in his jacket pockets, watching everything and saying nothing. Elijah set the gloves on the tool station and walked directly to the vehicle's left side. He crouched at the sill line and reached both hands along the lower forward panel to a specific point 18 centimeters rearward of the standard panel seam. A point with no visible fastener, no seam edge, no external feature that an outside technician would have any reason to reach for. His right index finger found a small recessed release and applied precisely the right amount of lateral pressure, and a 6-centimeter section of the sill panel shifted forward 3 millimeters and then swung upward on a concealed hinge, revealing a secondary access cavity that was not in any document Adrian had ever read, because it had only ever existed in internal engineering records that were not public. Adrian stared at the opening in the panel the way a man stares at a door he did not know existed in a house he believed he owned. From his jacket pocket, Elijah withdrew a sealed glass vial of the kind used in aerospace and experimental vehicle servicing, set it on the lip of the access cavity, and retrieved a fiber optic probe from the tool station. He used it to illuminate the interior of the manifold assembly, adjusting the probe's angle twice with the calm of someone following a mental map that has not faded. His hands knew this geometry the way hands know things that were learned before language attached itself to the knowledge. From his kit he drew an application syringe, marked at a specific line he had drawn on the body himself in a different period of his life, filled it from the vial to that mark, and applied it in 3 sequential points along the inner wall of the manifold partition, navigating the access path through the cavity with tools that should not, by any conventional standard, have been in the bag of a Level 2 technician at a Los Angeles showroom. He had carried those tools in a bag at the base of his locker for 14 months, with the unexamined logic of a man who does not entirely believe he has left something behind. It was Grace who said it first. She leaned slightly toward Charlotte without taking her eyes off the man working on the car and said quietly, "He doesn't know this vehicle the way a technician knows it. He knows it the way its designer knew it." Charlotte said nothing. She was watching Elijah's hands, watching the way they moved through the geometry of the engine bay without needing to look. The way a musician moves through a composition learned so deeply it no longer lives in the conscious mind, and she understood, not entirely, but enough, that she was in the presence of a category of knowledge she had not previously accounted for. Xavier Holt moved from the corner. He came to stand beside the open bay, close enough that when he spoke only Elijah and those immediately adjacent could hear. "Who are you?" he said, not loudly, not as a challenge. As a genuine question from a man recalibrating in real time. Elijah did not stop working. He applied the second compound point with the concentration of someone performing a procedure that does not forgive interruption. Then the second point was complete, and he straightened slightly without rising fully, and he answered without looking up. "A beat." Before that, Elijah Nash Voss, Xavier was very still. "Heinrich Voss was your father," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," Elijah said, and applied the third point. His hands did not shake. Grace connected the pressure test sequence on her diagnostic device and the numbers began to climb. 61, 68, 77, 84, and then the display stabilized at 91%, and the combustion chamber temperature distribution leveled into its normal range, and the secondary manifold pressure held at specification. Grace read the final values. She did not announce them. She did not need to. The numbers were visible to everyone in the bay, and what they said was clear, and what they meant was also clear. Elijah stripped the gloves, set them on the station, and stood. He looked at Charlotte. He did not say, "I told you." He said nothing at all because he was the kind of man who understood that some silences contain everything necessary. After Xavier Holt and Grace Lawson supervised the reloading of the Phantom Zero onto the hauler, Xavier walked to Charlotte at the bay entrance and shook her hand. The $40 million service agreement was still on the table. That was readable in the manner of his departure, which was the way a man leaves when he intends to call his attorneys in the morning rather than his competitors. Before reaching the SUV, he paused, turned back, and crossed to where Elijah was returning instruments to their cases at the tool station. "If you ever decide to return to this industry in a meaningful capacity," Xavier said, "I want to know about it." He offered a card. Elijah took it, looked at it briefly, placed it in his chest pocket. "Thank you," he said. Xavier nodded once and walked to his car, and the hauler and the two SUVs pulled out of the bay and back into the city and were gone. The showroom cleared slowly, the way people leave the site of something that has shifted the atmosphere, not wanting to rush past it, uncertain what exactly they had witnessed. Adrian remained, standing near the far wall with the look of a man who understood with complete clarity that the architecture of the next several years of his professional life had changed, and who had no effective counter-argument available to him. Charlotte asked everyone else to leave. When it was the three of them, Charlotte, Elijah, and Adrian in the margins, Charlotte turned to Adrian. "I need a comprehensive restructuring proposal for the technical inspection protocol on my desk by end of business Friday," she said. "Full scope. I'll review it personally." Adrian started to speak. Charlotte looked at him with an expression that was not unkind but was entirely finished, and he nodded and walked out. She had always understood that public humiliation was the least effective form of correction. She filed the situation away and turned to the room. Elijah was cleaning the work surface at the tool station. Charlotte stood 5 feet from him in a showroom that was quiet and cold and lit in its usual calculated white, and the distance between two people in a silent garage is one of the most honest distances there is because there is nothing else in it to use as a buffer. "Why didn't you tell me who you were?" she said. "Any of it. Your history with the car. Your father's name. Any of it." Elijah set down the cloth. "I applied for this job as Elijah Nash," he said. "Not as the son of Heinrich Voss, not as anything I used to be. If I had submitted that name, I would have been hired for the name, placed in a different role, given different expectations that had nothing to do with the actual work. I wanted to be hired for what I could do." Charlotte let that sit for a moment. "I made the wrong call this morning," she said. Elijah looked at her. "You made the call that the information in front of you supported," he said. "A level 2 technician accessed a restricted asset without authorization. That's a straightforward situation. The problem was that the situation wasn't straightforward." Charlotte looked back at him. "That doesn't reduce the error." "No," he said, "it doesn't." A phone slid from Elijah's jacket pocket as he reached for his keys. It clattered face up on the tool station surface, screen lit. The wallpaper was a photograph of a boy around 10 years old, grinning with the specific uninhibited openness that belongs to children that age, standing beside a battered classic car in a sunlit suburban driveway. Charlotte saw it. She said nothing, but she looked for a moment longer than the moment required. She offered him the technical director position, full authority over the department, Adrian reporting to him, compensation reflecting the actual level of knowledge he was bringing to the building. Elijah said he needed to think about it. Charlotte studied him. "Are you genuinely undecided," she said, "or are you determining whether I can tolerate uncertainty?" Elijah looked back at her, and for the first time in the full arc of that day, something in his expression shifted, a degree or two of warmth, small but real, the kind that belongs to a person recognizing something worth respecting in someone they had not expected to find it in. "Both," he said. Charlotte held his gaze for one more moment, nodded once, and walked toward the showroom. She did not look back. But she was smiling before she reached the door, in the small private way of someone who has just encountered a problem they did not know they were looking for and find, now that they have found it, that they are not afraid of it. 3 days later, Elijah called Charlotte at 8:40 in the morning and said 2 words. "I accept," she said. Monday, 8 o'clock, and ended the call, and sat for a moment in her office chair looking at the glass wall that separated her from the showroom floor below, where the morning's first technicians were beginning to arrive, and allowed herself something she rarely permitted during business hours, a moment of satisfaction that was not contingent on the next task. He arrived Monday at 7:45, earlier than the listed start time, as always. He used the main entrance instead of the side door, which was the only visible change from the previous 14 months. Jason was waiting in the hallway outside the technical department's office. Not a sign there, just there, the way a person shows up early for something they consider significant. He fell in beside Elijah without a greeting. When they reached the office door, Jason said, "Are you going to be in the bay or just sitting at a desk now?" Elijah said, "If the work needs it." Jason nodded. "Good. Because there's a Bugatti in Bay 3 with a fuel delivery anomaly that's been making me lose sleep." Something in Elijah's posture settled in a way that had nothing to do with the job title and everything to do with being exactly where he was supposed to be. The restructuring of the department unfolded incrementally over the following weeks, without ceremony and without announcement. Adrian Cole submitted his protocol proposal on Friday as directed. It was, honestly, not poor. There were ideas in it that reflected genuine technical understanding, which had always been the complicated truth about Adrian. The knowledge was present, buried beneath the defensiveness and the political calculation. Elijah read it, marked 3 sections for expansion, approved the remaining framework in an email of 3 sentences, and moved forward without making a ceremony of the role correction. He simply worked, and the department oriented itself around the work, the way water follows a change in gradient, without requiring instruction to do so. Charlotte observed him from the measured distance that the role required, not hovering, not performing oversight, but watching the way a person watches something they are revising their assessment of. She watched the way he sat beside a junior technician at a diagnostic console rather than standing over him, explaining a finding at the level of the other person's knowledge rather than his own. She watched him in Bay 3 with the Bugatti, under the car within the first hour of his first morning, working in the specific absorbed silence of a person for whom the problem is the only thing in the room. The fuel delivery anomaly was resolved before noon. Xavier Holt's service agreement was signed 11 days after the auction, which had proceeded as planned, the Phantom Zero selling to a private buyer at considerably above the estimated floor. The contract carried a clause that Xavier's attorney had proposed and Charlotte's had accepted without objection. All technical work on Voss-branded vehicles within the agreement was to carry, in the service documentation, the name of the lead engineer responsible. The first document generated under the contract carried the name Elijah Nash, not Nash Voss, not the son of anyone, just Nash. One evening after the showroom had closed and the last of the technical staff had gone home, Elijah stood alone in Bay 3 beside the Bugatti he had finished that morning. The work was done, the keys on the board, the paperwork complete. There was no practical reason to remain. He remained anyway. He placed his right hand on the hood in the old way, palm flat, fingers spread, listening to what was there, and the engine was cold and still and said nothing. That was fine. Not every machine needed to be heard. Some just needed to be in the same room with someone who knew how to hear. He stood in the empty bay in the silence that belongs to a place after the work is finished, and something in his posture was the posture of a man who has set something heavy down and discovered, with mild and genuine surprise, that his hands still remember how to be open. There were things he had left behind. There were things that had stayed. He carried both, and that was enough. There are people who know exactly who they are and do not require a room or a title or a name to confirm it. The most expensive mistake you can make with a person like that is to confuse their silence for absence, to assume that because they do not announce themselves, they have nothing to say. Elijah Nash had been in that building for 14 months. He had shown up early every morning, done the work no one else understood fully, and carried knowledge in his hands that could not be purchased, trained, or replicated by any department protocol. He could have walked past the Voss Phantom Zero that morning. He could have kept his eyes forward and let the car move into service, with a fault that would have found its moment eventually, at the worst possible time, in the worst possible way. No one in that room would have known what he had chosen not to do. But a person who holds that kind of knowledge and chooses silence when silence means danger is not being humble. They are being absent. And Elijah Nash, whatever else he had chosen to leave behind, had never been able to be absent from a machine that needed him. That was not a quality he had developed. It was one he had been born with and trained into, and carried through every version of himself he had ever been. The title changed, the room changed, the name on the badge changed, the hands remained the same, and when it mattered, when the most valuable automobile on the floor was one bad decision away from catastrophe, and every instrument in the building was telling the wrong story, those hands were the only ones in the building that knew the truth.